The rain fell soft but steady over the little white church on the hill, turning the red clay road into mud and washing the chalk from the gravestones. Inside, hymns swelled and broke like waves, voices mourning a man respected by all, except for the daughter he'd left behind in shame. Clara Jennings stood beneath an old oak at the edge of the churchyard, her shawl soaked through, clutching a damp handkerchief that once belonged to her father. She couldn't bring herself to go inside, not after the whispers that followed her since she was 16. The madwoman's girl. The bastard child. The one with the scar. Every glance, every pitying smile, had built a wall she no longer tried to climb. Her father's coffin gleamed beneath the church's yellow lamplight, and through the open doors she could just make out the preacher's words. Kind. Hollow things about mercy and forgiveness. Clara's lips trembled. If her father had truly believed in forgiveness, why had he let her live alone on the edge of town, sewing dresses for pennies, while his name was spoken with honor? A cold wind carried the smell of rain and horses. Clara looked up. A wagon was approaching the church. Black wheels, dark horses, and a tall man driving, his hat pulled low against the drizzle. Beside him sat two little girls, their matching brown cloaks drawn tight, their faces pale and quiet as ghosts. The man helped the girls down, his movements careful, practiced, like a man who'd done too much alone. He took their small hands and led them up the church steps, pausing only once. For just a second, his gaze found Clara through the rain. His eyes, gray as storm clouds, did not hold judgment or pity, only recognition, the kind that comes from shared loneliness. Clara's breath caught, but she turned away before he could speak, ashamed of the sudden warmth in her chest. She didn't belong near men like him, steady, strong, good, the kind who built lives instead of mending scraps. From the hill behind her, she could see Willow Creek stretched out below, a small town of white fences and red barns, where everyone knew everyone's story and everyone thought they knew hers. The tailor who let her sleep in his back room would soon sell the shop. When that happened, Clara would have nowhere left to go. She pressed the handkerchief to her lips and whispered a prayer she wasn't sure God still heard. "Just a place to start again," she murmured. "That's all I ask." When the service ended, she lingered long after the mourners left. The rain had eased, leaving only the drip of water from the eaves. The tall man emerged again, lifting one of the girls into the wagon. The younger child clutched a wilted bouquet, daisies, their petals drooping. As he turned to climb up, he glanced once more toward the oak tree. Clara froze. He didn't speak, just tipped his hat slightly, a gesture of quiet respect, then drove away into the mist. She stood alone in the empty churchyard, the echo of wheels fading into silence. For reasons she couldn't explain, her heart ached not just with grief, but with something that felt almost like curiosity. Who was that man with the storm-gray eyes? And why did his look make her feel, for the first time in years, not invisible? Clara gathered her small bundle of belongings and began walking toward town, her shoes squelching in the mud. Behind her, thunder rolled over the hills, low and distant, as if warning her that the path ahead, whatever it was, would not be easy. But for the first time in a long while, she didn't mind. Because somewhere between grief and rain, a stranger's gaze had reminded her she was still alive. The Callahan Ranch stretched wide across the plains, where the horizon met the sky in a long, quiet promise. It was land hard won, every fence post hammered by Luke Callahan's own hands, every steer branded under his watch. But for all his success, the house at the heart of that land felt empty. Luke had buried his wife, Hannah, 3 winters ago. She'd died in childbirth, leaving behind 2 daughters and a man who hadn't known how to say goodbye. Since then, he'd worked from dawn till dark, as if mending fences could mend the ache in his chest. His daughters, 7-year-old Abby and 4-year-old Molly, were the only reason he woke each morning. Abby was fierce and stubborn, her mother's mirror in every way. Molly was gentler, still too young to understand the permanence of loss. But both carried shadows in their eyes that Luke couldn't ease. no matter how many bedtime stories he fumbled through or lullabies he barely remembered. That morning, Luke stood on the porch, watching Abby chase chickens while Molly sat on the steps cradling a headless doll. The ranch hands were already at work, their shouts echoing across the fields. Luke's sister Margaret bustled out with a basket of laundry and a sharp tongue ready to strike. "You can't keep going like this, Luke," she said, hanging sheets on the line. "The girls need a mother. You need help." "I've got help," he said, nodding toward the barn where two ranch hands were fixing a wheel. Margaret gave him that look, half pity, half irritation. "You know what I mean. Someone who can care for the girls. Abby barely listens to me anymore. And Molly? She's still waking up crying at night." Luke's jaw tightened. "I can handle it," Margaret sighed, shaking her head. "You can handle a ranch, not a broken heart." Her words lingered long after she left. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the hills, Luke saddled his horse and rode into town to deliver an order at the general store. Willow Creek was small, its streets lined with lamplight and gossip. The store was busy but quieted when Luke entered. He was a man people respected and feared a little. Few dared to approach him, not since Hannah's death had turned him to stone. He was paying for nails and sugar when raised voices caught his ear near the back of the store. "Maybe if you kept your mouth shut, no one would have heard what you did," a woman hissed. Luke turned. A group of women stood near the fabric counter, surrounding a slight figure clutching a bundle of cloth to her chest. Clara Jennings. He recognized her immediately. The girl from the churchyard, the one who had stood in the rain with grief written all over her face. Her cheeks burned as she faced their sneers. "I did nothing wrong," she said quietly. The storekeeper coughed, trying to ease the tension, but the women only laughed. "Oh, come now, Clara, don't act innocent. Men don't look at a girl like you without a reason." Luke's blood simmered. Before he knew it, he was stepping forward. "That's enough," he said, his voice low and commanding. The women fell silent. "This store's for buying goods, not spreading filth." They murmured apologies and scattered. Clara stood frozen, her eyes wide, not with fear but disbelief. "Thank you," she whispered. He nodded. "You shouldn't have to thank me for that." As he left the store, he glanced back once. She was watching him, clutching her cloth tighter. That night, after tucking the girls into bed, Luke found himself staring into the dying fire. The image of Clara lingered in his mind, the sadness in her eyes, the quiet strength behind it. He didn't know why it mattered. He only knew that something about her silence reminded him of his own. And though he didn't realize it yet, the decision that would change both their lives had already begun forming in his heart. 2 days after that moment in the general store, Clara Jennings sat alone in her small rented room behind the tailor's shop, stitching the hem of a widow's black dress by candlelight. The room smelled faintly of dust and damp cloth, the single window fogged with the chill of approaching winter. She worked with the precision of habit, though her thoughts were far away. The tailor, Mr. Gibbons, had given her this room out of pity when her father died. But pity was fragile currency. That morning, he'd told her the shop had been sold, new owners coming within a week. She'd need to find another place to stay, another place, another chance to be turned away. She sighed and bent over her work, the thread trembling between her fingers. Just then, a soft knock echoed on the door. Clara frowned. No one visited her. When she opened it, Luke Callahan stood there, hat in hand, rain glistening on his coat. "Mr. Callahan?" she breathed, startled. He nodded slightly. "Evening, Miss Jennings. I hope I'm not disturbing you." She stepped aside hesitantly, gesturing to the lone chair by the table. "Please, come in." Luke ducked under the low frame, his presence filling the small room. He looked uncomfortable, his large hands twisting his hat brim. For a man who commanded ranch hands and acres of land, he suddenly seemed uncertain, vulnerable even. "I won't take much of your time," he began. I owe you an apology. The other day at the store, folks shouldn't have talked to you that way, and I shouldn't have just walked out." Clara blinked, surprised. "You did more than most would have." He gave a small nod, his eyes flicking to the half-sewn dress on the table. "You live here?" "For now," she said softly. "Not much longer." He hesitated, then said something she couldn't have predicted. "You're good with children, aren't you?" Clara frowned, uncertain where this was leading. I suppose so. I used to care for my cousin's girls before." Her voice trailed off. Luke inhaled deeply as if steadying himself. "I've got 2 daughters. They need a woman's hand. My sister helps, but she's got her own family in town. And the ranch, well, it don't leave me much time for what the girls really need." She said nothing, waiting. Then came the words that changed everything. "I'm asking if you'd marry me," he said simply. "Not for me, but for my girls." The candle's flame flickered between them. Clara stared, certain she'd misheard. "Marry you?" He nodded once, still holding his hat. "It wouldn't be that kind of marriage. You'd have a home, food, a name that'll keep people's tongues still, and in return the girls would have someone who cares for them." She rose slowly, her heart pounding. "Mr. Callahan, you don't even know me." "I know enough," he said quietly. "You've been hurt by gossip, same as I've been haunted by it. Maybe we can both find some peace in helping each other." For a long moment, only the rain filled the silence. Clara's throat ached. The offer was both a kindness and a cage. Marriage without love. A life built on necessity. She shook her head. "I can't. I won't be anyone's charity." Luke's jaw tightened, but he didn't argue. "I understand," he said softly. "Didn't mean to insult you." He turned, placing his hat back on his head, and stepped out into the rain. Hours later, as thunder rolled across Willow Creek, Clara sat by the window watching the storm. The Taylor's eviction still echoed in her mind. Her candle had burned out. Her coins barely filled a small pouch. She had nowhere to go. When lightning flashed, she saw the road leading west, to Callahan Ranch. By dawn, she stood at his gate, soaked to the bone, clutching her shawl around her shoulders. The gray sky broke open above her as she whispered through chattering teeth, "Does the offer still stand?" Luke stepped out onto the porch, surprise flashing across his face. Then he nodded once, silent but sure, and just like that, a bargain, cold, practical, and fragile, was made. Neither of them yet understood it would become the beginning of everything they'd both stopped believing in. The morning of Clara Jennings' wedding was gray and windless, the kind of day that felt neither blessed nor cursed, just still, as if the heavens themselves were holding their breath. The ceremony took place in the tiny chapel at the edge of Willow Creek, the same one where Clara had once watched her father's funeral from the shadows. Now she stood inside its worn wooden walls, dressed not in lace or silk, but in her mended blue dress, the only good one she owned. Her hands trembled around a small bunch of wildflowers she'd gathered from the road. Across from her stood Luke Callahan, tall and solemn, dressed in his Sunday coat. His hat rested on the pew, his weathered hands clasped in front of him. There was no nervousness in his stance, only the quiet resolve of a man who had made up his mind long before stepping through those doors. Between them, the preacher cleared his throat. "Marriage," he began, "is a covenant not of convenience, but of care, of duty, and of grace." Clara's heart twisted. Duty. Grace. She could manage duty. She had lived her whole life on it. But grace? That was harder. Luke's 2 daughters stood beside him. Little Molly clung to his leg, peeking at Clara with wide, curious eyes. Abby, older and bolder, frowned openly, her small hands folded tight across her chest. To them, she was not a bride, only a stranger about to change everything. When the preacher asked for the vows, Luke's voice was steady. "I, Luke Callahan, take you, Clara Jennings, to be my lawful wife, to provide for you and protect you as long as the Lord allows." Clara swallowed hard, her own voice barely a whisper. "I, Clara Jennings, take you, Luke Callahan, to be my lawful husband, to honor and care for your home and for your girls." The preacher smiled kindly, though his eyes betrayed his curiosity. This was no love match. Everyone in Willow Creek knew that. When the time came for the ring, Luke hesitated before pulling one from his pocket. It wasn't new. It was delicate and gold with a small sapphire dulled by time. "It was Hannah's," he said quietly. "My late wife's. I'd rather it stay in the family." Clara froze, unsure whether to accept it. But when she saw the softness in his eyes, something almost apologetic, she nodded. He slid it onto her finger. It was loose, too big for her slender hand. "You may kiss the bride," the preacher said gently. Luke gave a small, polite nod instead. Clara returned it, grateful for his restraint. When they stepped outside, the wind had picked up. No one threw rice, no one cheered. There were no guests except the preacher, Luke's sister Margaret, and the two small girls, one curious, one defiant. Clara lifted her gaze to the gray sky and whispered a silent prayer. "Please, let this be a beginning, not another ending." The wagon ride to Callahan Ranch was long and quiet. Clara sat beside Luke, her fingers twisting in her lap. The girls sat opposite, Molly half asleep, Abby glaring out the window at the passing fields. The silence pressed heavy between them, broken only by the creak of the wheels and the horses' steady rhythm. Halfway home, Molly stirred, her small head tilting against Clara's shoulder. Clara froze, afraid to move. Then, slowly, she let the child rest there, her warmth seeping through the thin fabric of her dress, Luke noticed. For a moment his jaw unclenched, his eyes softening in the fading light. He didn't speak, but in that single glance, something wordless passed between them, an acknowledgement of the strange, fragile bond beginning to form. When they reached the ranch, Mrs. Whitlow, the housekeeper, met them at the door, her face stiff with disapproval. "So this is the new mistress?" she said flatly. Clara forced a smile. "Just Clara will do." But as she crossed the threshold of her new home, the sound of the wind outside seemed to whisper otherwise. She was no longer Clara Jennings, the outcast seamstress. She was Mrs. Callahan now, and though no one had cheered for this marriage, she felt something deep within her shift, like a locked door creaking open just a little. Maybe, just maybe, she hadn't stepped into a cage at all. Perhaps she'd stepped into a story still waiting to be written. The Callahan Ranch sat golden under the morning sun, its white fences stretching like ribs across the rolling pasture. Cattle grazed lazily while the wind carried the scent of hay and horses. From the outside, the place was alive with order and rhythm. Inside the big house, though, it felt more like a battlefield. It was Clara's first week as Mrs. Callahan. Every morning began with the same quiet tension. Abby refusing to speak at breakfast, Molly spilling milk and Luke already out the door before either could protest. The ranch hands came and went, nodding politely to their new mistress, but whispering about her when they thought she couldn't hear. The housekeeper, Mrs. Whitlow, kept her lips pursed so tightly it looked painful. "She means well," Luke's sister Margaret had told her kindly one afternoon. "She just doesn't like change." But Clara knew it was more than that. It wasn't change Mrs. Whitlow disliked. It was her. Still, Clara had weathered colder stares. She'd grown up being treated as though she were invisible. This was different. Here, invisibility wasn't enough. She had to earn her place, so she worked. Hard. She rose before dawn to cook breakfast, even though Mrs. Whitlow tried to shoo her from the kitchen. She mended Luke's torn shirts, scrubbed the floors, and fixed the squeaky hinge on the pantry door herself. She learned how the girls liked their hair brushed, how Abby preferred her braids even and tight, how Molly liked her ribbons mismatched because Mama used to say colors don't have to match to be pretty. That first time Molly called her Mama, it slipped out like a secret, quiet and accidental. Clara was tucking her into bed, humming softly when the child mumbled, half asleep, "Good night, Mama." Clara froze, heart pounding. She didn't correct her. She only whispered back, "Good night, sweetheart," and sat beside her long after she'd fallen asleep, watching the rise and fall of her tiny chest. Abby, however, was a storm Clara couldn't calm. She had her mother's strong jaw, her father's piercing gray eyes, and a stubborn will that made her both brave and brittle. One afternoon, Clara found her near the barn, throwing stones at a fence post. "Abby," she called gently. "That's not safe." The girl didn't look at her. You're not my real mama, she said coldly. The words stung more than Clara wanted to admit. I know, she said softly, but I'd still like to keep you from hurting yourself. Abby turned, glaring. You're just here because Papa felt sorry for you. Everyone says so. Clara swallowed hard. People say many things, Abby. That doesn't make them true. The girl's eyes wavered for a moment, but she turned away. You'll leave. Everyone does. Clara didn't answer. Instead, she picked up one of the stones and set it gently on the fence post. Then I guess you'll have to see if I do. That night, when Luke came home, he found the girls already asleep and Clara sitting by the hearth, mending a torn blanket. How was your day? He asked, his tone gruff but not unkind. She smiled faintly. Better than yesterday. He nodded almost approvingly. The girls, are they behaving? They're learning, she said, glancing up. And so am I. Their eyes met across the firelight. Something unspoken passed between them. A fragile understanding. A shared exhaustion. Later, when he went to check on his daughters, he found Abby curled up close to her little sister, clutching the patched doll Clara had fixed that morning. He paused, watching them for a long time, then looked toward the room where Clara slept. For the first time since his wife's death, Luke Callahan felt a small flicker of peace settle in his chest. Down the hall, Clara lay awake, staring at the ceiling. She could still hear the echo of Abby's words. You're not my real mama. No, she thought. Not yet. But maybe if she kept showing up, kept staying when no one else ever had, someday the word mama might belong to her after all. Luke Callahan had built his life around fences, wooden ones to hold his cattle, and invisible ones to keep his heart safe. He was good at both. But lately it felt like the woman in his house was finding the weak spots in those walls, and he didn't quite know what to do about it. It had been 3 months since the wedding. The ranch was running smoother than it had in years. The girls laughed more now. Real laughter, not the brittle kind that used to vanish too quickly. Clara had filled the house with warmth that wasn't loud or showy, but steady. The kind of warmth that came from soup simmering on the stove, from mended shirts folded neatly, from the sound of lullabies drifting through the hall. And still, Luke couldn't seem to step across the space between them. Every time he caught himself watching her, how she tucked a loose curl behind her ear, how she bit her lip while sewing, how her laughter made the girls glow, he pulled back, ashamed. You married her for the girls, he reminded himself, not for yourself. He told himself he was honoring his late wife's memory, that keeping distance was a kind of faithfulness. But the truth was harder. He was afraid. Afraid of feeling again, of losing again. That morning, he watched from the corral as Clara helped Abby mount a horse for the first time. The girl's face was a mix of terror and pride, her small hands gripping the reins tight. Clara stood beside her, one hand steady on the saddle. You've got this, Clara said softly. The horse can feel when you're scared. Show her you're brave. Abby hesitated, then nodded, nudging the horse forward. Luke held his breath as the animal began to walk. For a moment, it was just the sound of hooves and wind, and then Abby let out a laugh so pure, so wild, it stopped Luke cold. He hadn't heard that laugh since before Hannah died. Clara turned toward him, her face glowing with quiet triumph. She waved. He didn't wave back. Instead, he turned away, his throat tight, and busied himself with a fence that didn't really need fixing. That night, he couldn't sleep. The memory of Clara's smile, the sound of Abby's laughter, the sight of Molly nestled against her new mama, it all churned inside him until he had to get up and walk. He found himself outside the girls' room, the door slightly ajar. Inside, Clara sat on the edge of Molly's bed, humming a soft tune. Her voice was low and tender, almost too fragile for the quiet around it. Luke froze. He knew that song. Hannah used to sing it back when the world felt safe. He gripped the doorframe until his knuckles whitened. The ache that swelled inside him wasn't anger or jealousy. It was something deeper. Grief, love, fear, all tangled together. When Clara finally rose, she paused by the doorway, surprised to find him standing there. I didn't mean to wake you, she whispered. He shook his head. You didn't. His voice was rough. That song, it's one my mother used to hum, she said. I hope you don't mind. Molly seems to like it. He hesitated, then shook his head again. No, I don't mind. Their eyes met, hers calm and gentle, his shadowed and uncertain. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then Luke stepped aside, letting her pass. He saddled his horse and rode into the night, the moon hanging low over the hills. He rode hard and far, as if distance could quiet the noise inside him. By the time he returned, dawn was breaking, and Clara was already in the kitchen, pouring coffee. She looked up as he entered, her eyes searching his. You ride often at night? She asked softly. Only when I can't sleep, he said. She nodded, understanding more than he said. Then I hope someday you do. He didn't answer. But as he took the mug from her hands, his fingers brushed hers, just barely. It wasn't enough to break his walls, but for the first time he felt them tremble. The wind had shifted over Willow Creek, carrying whispers of spring and of gossip. It started small, as it always did. A merchant's wife mentioned seeing Clara Callahan buying ribbons at the general store, and someone else remarked that for a woman with no dowry, she certainly seemed well kept now. By the time the story reached the saloon, it had twisted into something uglier. The outcast who married the rancher for his money. Clara didn't hear it at first. Her days were too full, caring for the girls, managing the kitchen, helping with the accounts Luke had once neglected. The Callahan ranch was finally running like a home again. There were evenings filled with laughter, with music from Abby's small fiddle and Molly's giggles as she chased the barn cats. Luke, though, had begun to change. The quiet between him and Clara was no longer cold. It was charged. Sometimes when she handed him a plate or brushed past him in the hallway, their eyes would meet, and a warmth neither could name would flicker between them. He'd look away first, always, but not before she saw it. The softness behind his reserve. That fragile peace shattered one afternoon. Clara was in town, selling embroidered linens at the general store to earn extra money for Abby's birthday dress. She was arranging her wares when a familiar voice froze her blood. Well, if it isn't Clara Jennings, drawled Jed Porter. He stood in the doorway, dressed in a fine suit, a cruel smirk curling his lips. Once, before Luke, Jed had courted her or pretended to. He'd whispered sweet words and promises, then spread lies when she refused his advances. His rumor had branded her as a woman of loose virtue, and the town had believed him. Clara's throat went dry. Mr. Porter, she said quietly. Please step aside, he chuckled. Mrs. Callahan now, isn't it? Heard you finally found a man desperate enough to take you in. The words hit like stones. Several shoppers glanced up. Clara's cheeks burned, but she lifted her chin. My husband and I owe you nothing. Good day. Jed's grin widened. You always were proud. But I'll say this. You've done well for yourself. Luke Callahan's a rich man. Guess your charm wasn't wasted after all. The storekeeper cleared his throat sharply, but the damage was done. By evening, half the town was whispering again. Old wounds reopened. When Luke returned home that night, his face was grim. He didn't greet her, didn't sit at the table. I heard talk in town, he said finally, his tone low but hard. About you. About Jed Porter. Clara froze. What did you hear? That he knew you once, Luke said. That you... He stopped himself, jaw tightening. Is there truth to it? The sting of betrayal was sharper than any gossip. You think I'd shame you? After all you've given me? His silence was answer enough. Tears welled in her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. You married me to care for your girls, Mr. Callahan. I've done that. But I won't stay where I'm not trusted. She turned, walking past him toward the small room she'd claimed as her own. By nightfall, she had packed her few belongings. The sky was black and heavy, thunder grumbling over the hills. She didn't see the two small figures watching from the stairs, Abby and Molly, faces pale with fear. When Clara slipped out into the storm, shawl drawn tight around her shoulders, the girls followed her, silent as ghosts. By the time Luke realized they were gone, the rain had turned into a downpour. Panic seized him. He tore through the house, shouting their names. No answer, only wind and thunder. Abby! Molly! Then he saw it. The back door swinging open, muddy footprints leading into the darkness. For the first time in years, Luke Callahan felt true terror grip his heart. The walls he'd built around himself had finally cracked, and through the gaps rushed the storm that would test everything he had left. The storm came down in sheets, wild and merciless. Rain pounded against the earth, turning the ranch trails into rivers of mud. The wind howled through the trees, snapping branches like bones. Luke Callahan rode into it without hesitation, the fury of the weather matching the turmoil inside him. He had lost them, Clara, and worse, his daughters. The thought clawed at his chest with every gallop of his horse. How could I have been so blind? He had built his life on caution, on silence, on control. But his silence had driven away the one woman who'd brought life back into his home, and his stubborn pride had endangered the only family he had left. Lightning split the sky, illuminating the endless stretch of prairie. He shouted into the storm, his voice hoarse, "Clara! Abby! Molly!" No answer, only the roar of thunder. Back at the ranch, he'd found Clara's small trunk missing and the girls' coats gone. That was when the truth hit him. The children had followed her, too young to understand the danger of the open plains at night. He cursed himself. You fool. You let your fear cost you everything. He rode toward the forest path, knowing Clara would have taken the shorter route to the old mill on the creek, the only place she could find shelter. The trail was barely visible now, half flooded and littered with branches. His horse stumbled more than once, but Luke pressed on, ignoring the sting of rain against his face. Far ahead, a flicker of movement caught his eye, a scrap of fabric caught on a thorn bush. He dismounted, heart pounding, and recognized it instantly. Clara's shawl. God, please, he muttered, clutching it. He found the footprints next. Small, uneven, half washed away by the rain. 2 tiny ones beside hers, his daughters. The wind seemed to push him forward, driving him through the storm until finally he saw it, the dim outline of the old mill by the creek. The structure leaned like a ghost in the night, its windows shattered long ago. But through the cracks of the door, a faint light flickered. He ran inside. Clara sat on the floor, drenched and trembling, clutching the girls against her. They were wrapped in her skirt, pale and exhausted. When she looked up and saw him, relief and sorrow collided in her eyes. "Luke," she breathed. For a moment, he couldn't speak. He knelt beside them, pulling off his coat and wrapping it around all 3. The girls stirred, their eyes fluttering open. "Papa," Abby whispered. He gathered them in his arms, voice breaking. "I'm here, sweetheart. I'm here." The tension, the pride, the walls, all of it dissolved under the weight of what almost was lost. He turned to Clara, his voice raw. "I was wrong," he said. "About everything. I let what people said twist what I knew in my heart." She shook her head weakly. "You don't owe me." "Yes, I do." His hand found hers, rough and trembling. "You gave my girls back their laughter. You gave me back my home, and I repaid you with doubt. That's on me." Tears mixed with rain on her cheeks. "I never wanted to be your burden, Luke." "You never were," he said fiercely. "You were the answer I was too proud to see." For a long time, the only sound was the rain on the roof, softer now, like the world itself was exhaling. He stayed with them through the night, holding his daughters close, his arm around Clara's shoulders. By dawn, the storm had passed, leaving the air fresh and heavy with promise. As the first light crept through the broken mill window, Luke looked at Clara. Truly looked at her, hair tangled, face pale, eyes full of quiet strength, and saw the woman who had saved his family not once, but twice. He pressed her hand to his lips. "I don't deserve you," he murmured. She smiled faintly, weary but certain. "Maybe not. But your girls need me, and I think I need you too." Outside, the sun broke through the clouds, casting a golden glow over the drenched fields. Luke stood, lifting Molly in his arms, Abby clinging to Clara's skirt. Together, they began the long walk home. For the first time in years, Luke didn't feel like a man haunted by loss. He felt like a man with something to live for. The sun rose over Willow Creek like a promise, a pale gold light washing away the last trace of the storm. The land glistened, reborn after the night's fury. Luke Callahan led his family home, step by step, through the muddy trail that wound back to the ranch. He carried Molly in his arms, her small head tucked against his shoulder, while Abby walked beside Clara, clutching her hand. The air was cool, scented with wet earth and cedar. Birds began to sing again, their songs timid at first, then stronger. Clara's legs trembled with exhaustion, but her heart felt strangely light. She had spent the night half expecting Luke's anger, or worse, his silence. Instead, she had seen the man beneath his walls, a father desperate for his daughters, a soul aching for forgiveness. When the ranch came into view, she nearly wept. Smoke rose faintly from the chimney, curling into the morning sky. It looked like peace. At the porch, Luke paused and set Molly down gently. He turned to Clara, rain-washed and mud-streaked but radiant in the dawn light. "Clara," he began, his voice rough, "you don't have to stay if you don't want to. I'll understand if you wish to go back to town, start over somewhere else. You deserve better than a man who let pride blind him." She looked at him for a long moment, the wind tugging at her damp hair. "Start over?" she repeated softly. "Luke, I already did. Right here." He blinked, unsure if he'd heard right. "When I came to this ranch," she said, "I was nothing more than a name people spat out with pity or scorn. But your girls gave me a place. And you—" She hesitated, then smiled faintly. "You gave me a reason to fight for it." Luke's throat tightened. "Clara." But before he could speak again, the girls ran ahead, bursting through the door and shouting with joy. The house, once echoing with emptiness, came alive with laughter and the clatter of boots. The sound filled every hollow space in Luke's chest. Later that morning, while the girls napped by the fire, Luke found Clara in the kitchen, her sleeves rolled up, hair still damp from the rain. She was kneading dough, humming softly, the same lullaby she'd sung at the mill. The light from the window framed her like something holy. He stood in the doorway watching her for a long time. Finally, he stepped closer. "Clara." She glanced up, startled. "Luke." He set down a small bundle on the table, a delicate silver brooch in the shape of a wildflower. "It belonged to my mother," he said quietly. "Hannah wore it once, on our wedding day. I kept it put away all these years. I'd like you to have it." Clara's hands trembled as she touched it. "Are you sure?" He nodded. "You've earned it more than anyone ever could." For a moment, silence stretched between them, soft, full, unhurried. Then, almost without thought, Luke reached up and brushed a strand of hair from her face. She didn't pull away. "You've changed this house," he said. "Changed me. I was living like a man afraid of his own heart, but last night, when I thought I'd lost you, I knew I couldn't go back to that life." Tears welled in Clara's eyes. "What are you saying, Luke?" He took her hands, rough palms enveloping hers. "I'm saying this ranch isn't just mine anymore. It's yours. Ours. If you'll stay." She smiled, the kind that reached her eyes. "I never left, Luke." Outside, the girls' laughter drifted in through the open window. The sound wrapped around them like sunlight, warm and pure. Luke pulled her gently into his arms, resting his forehead against hers. For the first time, there were no walls left between them, only a shared peace, quiet and deep, like the land they stood upon. That evening, as the family sat together by the fire, Clara looked around the room, the man beside her, the girls curled up in their blankets, and realized something simple, something beautiful. She hadn't just found a home. She had built one. And though the storm had nearly taken everything, it had given her something far greater in return. belonging. Spring came to Willow Creek like a slow miracle. The hills turned green again. The river thawed and sang through the valley, and the Callahan Ranch, once silent and cold, now hummed with life. For the first time in years, the house wasn't just a place to sleep. It was alive with laughter, the scent of baking bread, and the soft sound of children's footsteps running down the hall. Every corner that once echoed with loss now whispered with belonging. Luke Callahan stood on the porch one morning, coffee steaming in his hand, watching the girls feed the chickens. Abby wore her father's old hat, too big for her head, while Molly trailed behind with a bucket nearly her size. They giggled at the mess they made, scattering grain everywhere. Behind him, Clara appeared quietly, her apron dusted with flour, her hair tied loosely with a ribbon the girls had gifted her. She leaned against the doorway, smiling at the sight before them. "They're growing," she said softly. Luke nodded. "You've done that." She shook her head. "We've done that." He looked at her then, really looked. She still carried the quiet grace that had drawn him in, but now there was light in her eyes, confidence, peace. The woman who had arrived on his porch months ago had been trembling and unsure. The woman beside him now stood tall, strong, and loved. After breakfast, Luke took the girls to the fields to teach them how to ride properly. Clara watched from the fence, laughter bubbling from her lips as Molly shrieked with delight when her pony took a few too bold steps. Luke caught Clara's gaze and grinned, a small, rare grin that warmed his whole face. It struck her how natural it felt now, how easy the air between them had become. That evening, after the girls were asleep, they sat together on the porch beneath a sky full of stars. The night air was cool, carrying the smell of wild sage and wood smoke. Luke cleared his throat, nervous in a way he hadn't been since he was a young man. "You know," he said, "when I asked you to marry me, I thought I was saving you. I thought I was giving you a roof, a name, a bit of safety." He paused, turning the empty coffee mug in his hands. "But you're the one who saved me, Clara. You and the girls both." Her breath caught, the words striking something deep inside. "Luke." He looked up, his eyes steady and full of the tenderness he'd fought so long to hide. "You don't have to call this place yours because of me. But I'd like you to, if you want it." For a moment, she couldn't speak. The stars reflected in her eyes as she whispered, "It already is. You all are." He reached for her hand, rough from ranch work, yet gentle in his grasp. "Then let's do it right this time," he said. "Not out of duty or need, but love." She smiled, tears glistening. "Yes, Luke. That's all I ever wanted." The wind stirred softly, carrying the faint hum of a lullaby from inside, the one Clara always sang to the girls. Luke pulled her closer, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. Together, they watched the horizon fade into silver moonlight. From the doorway, Abby appeared, rubbing her eyes. "Papa? Mama Clara? Can't sleep?" Clara's heart stilled at the sound. Mama Clara. The first time Abby had ever said it aloud. Luke smiled and lifted the girl into his lap. "Then stay right here with us, sweetheart. We're all where we belong." Molly soon toddled out, half asleep, clutching her blanket. Clara gathered her into her arms. The four of them sat together. Under the wide Texas sky, no longer a broken man, a lonely woman, and two lost children, but a family made whole. The stars burned brighter, as if to bear witness to their healing. The night air was soft, the land quiet and vast around them, and as the girls drifted off to sleep, their small breaths steady and safe, Clara laid her head on Luke's shoulder, his hand finding hers in the dark. In that stillness, they both knew. This wasn't the end of their story. It was the beginning of the life they'd built together, a family, a home, a love that had weathered every storm and come through shining.